Peppa Pig, the other George. The morning started strangely. Peppa woke up in her bed. Sunlight slipped through the curtains. Everything seemed normal, but the house was filled with an unnatural silence, the kind you feel before you understand it's wrong. She looked at George's bed, empty. Peppa went downstairs. The kitchen was silent. Cups were on the table, but no steam rose from them. The ladle was resting by the stove. No footsteps, no voices. George? Mummy? Daddy? No one answered. She began climbing the stairs again, and then heard a creak from the bedroom. Her heart started beating faster. The door was slightly open. Peppa peeked in and froze. George was lying in bed, blanket neat. He was sleeping, deeply, the dinosaur toy beside him. His chest rose and fell. His face looked peaceful, eyes shut. Peppa stepped closer. "George," she whispered. He didn't respond. "Peppa?" A voice? She turned. George stood in the doorway. Also George, awake, real, staring at her with wide, frightened eyes. "Who is that?" she breathed. He didn't answer, just stared at himself, asleep in the bed. The one in bed began to move, sat up slowly, head tilted slightly to one side. A smile began to stretch across his face, too wide, too long, without blinking, eyes open, far too open. "Who are you?" Peppa shouted. That's George, but it's not him." The sitting George lifted his head. "I woke up," he said. The voice was correct, but somehow misaligned, like a recording slightly out of pitch. The real George took a step back. "He's smiling," he whispered. "He isn't blinking." Peppa grabbed her brother's hoof. They ran. On the walls, photographs, Peppa and George. But now on every photo, two George, one familiar, one slightly taller, always smiling. Downstairs, the windows were dimmed. The house felt tighter. The hallway stretched unnaturally long. Crumbs on the floor Peppa didn't remember. Doors now led to strange rooms. A bathroom without mirrors. A living room with 3 sofas, when there had only ever been one. They locked themselves in the closet. Peppa was trembling. "Say something," she whispered. I don't know who he is," George said. "But I'm real. I remember when you taught me to draw the sun with little rays, and he just lies there and smiles." Peppa nodded. "I know," she whispered. "It's you, the other one." He wasn't breathing. Silence. Then footsteps, light, precise, even. He was behind the door. They could feel him. He didn't knock, didn't speak, he just waited. A shadow appeared under the door, small. Hooves. He crouched, peered through the gap. Too long. Then a voice, software flat, like it was being played back. "Peppa, open the door. We're the same." They escaped through the back, but outside, the street was empty, all the houses shut, the windows fogged, and in every reflection, a shape that looked like George. That evening, Peppa lay in bed, George beside her. They held hooves. You're really you, right?" she asked. George looked at her, smiled, silently, too long, without blinking. Since then, there are 2 George in the house. One plays with her, the other stands in the hallway, sometimes by the mirror, sometimes in the bed. Both of them smile. Peppa is afraid to fall asleep, afraid to wake up, afraid she won't notice when they switch places. Because one night, one of them leaned toward her ear and whispered, "He's sleeping. You chose wrong." Peppa Pig, the extra rooms. One morning, Peppa woke up and went downstairs. Halfway to the kitchen, she stopped. There was a door in the hallway, where there had always been just a plain wall, where she had run past hundreds of times, now hung an old wooden door, cracked and peeling. The handle gleamed with dull metal, and there was a smell, dampness, and something else, something stale. "Mummy, Daddy," Peppa asked at breakfast, "where did that door come from?" Mummy calmly poured tea and said, "It's always been there, Peppa." Daddy didn't even lift his eyes from the newspaper. No one said anything more. After breakfast, Peppa and George carefully approached the door. Peppa placed her hoof on the cold handle and pushed. Behind the door was a room, empty, grey. The walls were cracked, the floor thick with dust. The air was heavy and damp, smelling like wet cloth. In the corner of the room lay an old battered ball. Peppa grabbed George's hoof and closed the door. The next day, another door appeared. On the landing, where a picture of flowers had always hung, the picture was gone. In its place stood a tall, narrow door covered in scratches. The room behind it was different again, a long corridor stretching into darkness. On the walls hung paintings, but the faces were blurred, as if they had melted in the rain. When Peppa called out, "Who's there?" only an echo answered, but it was not her voice. It was as if someone else had repeated her words, twisted and wrong. Every day new doors appeared, sometimes tiny ones, as if for very small creatures, sometimes huge, twice as tall as Daddy Pig. Once they even found a door right in the floor. When Peppa opened it, a wave of cold, damp basement air hit her face. Old rooms began to disappear. One day Peppa went to find the bathroom, and behind the door was a dusty, windowless hall. Somewhere in the corner sat her old, forgotten potty. The house was changing. The walls seemed to breathe, the ceilings creaked, and in some of the new rooms, something moved in the shadows, very slowly, very quietly. But whenever Peppa looked closely, everything froze. When she asked Mummy, "Why is everything changing?" Mummy just smiled. "We're growing, Peppa." But her smile was too wide, and her eyes looked right through Peppa. Sometimes Peppa heard voices behind the new doors, thin, childlike. Peppa, George, but they weren't her friends. The way the name sounded was all wrong. On the 6th day, Peppa tried to open the front door, but outside there was no garden, no sunlight, only a dark, endless hallway, door after door after door, and in each room, behind the thin walls, something whispered. "We're alone here," George whispered. Peppa hugged him tighter. Suddenly, one of the doors creaked open just a crack. Something gray peeked out and quickly disappeared again. On the 7th day, their bedroom vanished. They woke up in a new room. The walls were unfamiliar, the ceiling too low. The windows showed not the street but thick, swirling gray fog. On the wall hung an old family photo, but instead of faces, only blank white patches. That evening they saw their parents. Mummy and Daddy stood in one of the new rooms, but their faces were different, as if someone had tried to recreate them from memory and got it wrong. Their voices sounded strange. "Welcome home." Since then, the Pig family's house disappeared from all maps. No one could find it anymore. Peppa Pig, the wardrobe. It started with a sound, a small one, a gentle creak like someone moving in the dark. Peppa woke up in the middle of the night. The room was dark, only a faint glow of moonlight spilled through the curtains. She heard it again. Creak, rustle, very soft. Not the wind, not George. She looked at the wardrobe. It was closed, but it felt like someone was standing behind the door, listening. In the morning, she almost forgot. Almost. Until George couldn't find his toy dinosaur. He'd left it by the bed, he was sure. Now it was gone. Peppa looked under the bed, in the toy box behind the curtains. Nothing. She opened the wardrobe. When she pulled the handle, she felt a strange resistance, like something was gently holding it from the inside. And when it opened, it was darker than usual, and deeper. That night, Peppa woke up again, this time to a knock. Software. Hollow. Like something was tapping from inside the door. She didn't go near it. She lay awake until morning, unblinking. The next day, her socks were missing. Then, her notebook. Then, George's pillow. Something disappeared every morning. Nobody noticed. Her parents said, "You probably misplaced it." But Peppa knew. The wardrobe was taking them. She started tying the doors shut with string each night, knots tight and careful. Each morning, the string was undone, the door opened just a little. On the 4th night, George began whispering strange things in his sleep, words, phrases. "He knows I'm here. He promised to show me the toys, and he said you're coming too." During the day, George was quiet. He stared at the floor, sometimes straight at the wardrobe. On the 5th night, Peppa woke to silence, complete heavy silence. She looked toward George's bed, empty. His blanket was folded. On the pillow, a drawing in chalk, a shadowy figure standing inside the wardrobe. On the floor, small hoof-shaped prints leading into the dark. The door stood wide open. Mummy said George had gone to visit his aunt. Daddy smiled, but his eyes were distant. Peppa tried to explain. No one listened. Even at school, no one remembered George. Susie said, "You never had a brother, Peppa." You must be imagining things." She came home, sat on the floor, and stared at the wardrobe for hours. Inside, silence. But if you listened long enough, you could hear breathing, slow, sliding. On the final night, Peppa blocked the door with a chair, wrapped tape around the handles, slipped a note under her pillow. "If I'm gone, he took me too." She woke up to a rustling sound. The chair was knocked over, tape torn, the wardrobe open, very wide. Something cold spilled out of it, and two small hands, pink, familiar, copied from her own. In the morning, the room was empty. One bed, one chair, one open wardrobe, no toys, no footprints, no Peppa. On the wall above the bed, a message scratched into the paint. "Now they are mine." Peppa Pig. Too many Peppas. One morning, Peppa woke up and saw herself exactly the same, standing in the corner of her room, just watching unblinking. Same pink skin, same red dress, same bow, but the eyes slightly darker, like dusty buttons. For a second, Peppa thought it was a mirror, but there was no mirror there. The second, Peppa blinked and calmly walked downstairs as if everything was normal. In the kitchen, everything seemed fine. Mummy was setting the table. Daddy was reading the newspaper. George was playing with his toy. "Good morning, Peppas," Mummy said. Peppas, plural. No one seemed surprised. No one asked questions. Two Peppas sat at the table. They ate the same way, chewed in sync, drank with the same tilt of the head, except one of them was staring at the other, constantly, without blinking. The next day, Peppa woke up, and now there were three. One stood by the window, another lay in her bed. The real one had woken up on the floor, wrapped in a blanket. Now no one could tell who had been first, and no one asked. At breakfast, the three Peppas sat together. One ate, one smiled silently, one just sat with her eyes closed and mouth wide open. Every morning a new one appeared, always quiet, always suddenly. They didn't speak, they just watched. Each one stared, at the others, at the real one, waiting. By day 5, there were 5 Peppas, lined up on the stairs. One stood ankle deep in the bathtub. The mirror was covered in prints, tiny hoof prints. Silently, at night, soft sounds came from the hallway, like someone crawling and repeating a name. Peppa, Peppa, Peppa. The real Peppa started hiding. She didn't sleep in the bed anymore. Ate at night when the others weren't watching, erased her name from her notebooks, tried to make sure she was still herself, but the mirror more and more often showed someone else. One day she tried to run, opened the front door, and another Peppa was already standing there, staring, smiling, but she had no eyes, just black hollows. A piece of fabric hung from her mouth like a broken toy. Peppa stepped back. The door shut on its own. Mummy didn't say new things anymore, only the same phrases on repeat. "Everything is fine, Peppa. Everything is fine, Peppa. Everything is fine, Peppa." Daddy sat in his chair, patting one of them on the head, but Peppa knew. He didn't know which one. George played with 4 Peppas at once, each holding a toy, all saying, "We love you, George. We love you, George," he cried. One morning Peppa woke up and didn't recognize anyone. The room was filled with herself. They sat on the floor, on shelves, under the bed, some faceless, some soundless, some stared directly at her. She tried to scream, but heard instead, "I'm the real one. No, I'm the real one. Me, me, me," all at once. That night, the lights never turned on. Peppa looked into the mirror one last time, looked at herself, and didn't recognize the face. In the reflection, there were 9 Peppas, but none of them blinked. The next day, the house was quiet. From outside, everything seemed normal. The family at breakfast, silence, perfect order, and Peppa sat at the table, now in every room, and no one asked which one was real anymore, because the real one was gone. Peppa Pig, the 5th room. The Pig family's house had always been the same: a kitchen, a living room, a bathroom, and 2 bedrooms upstairs. Peppa knew every step, every creak in the floor, every spot on the wall. But one morning, as she was heading down to the kitchen, she stopped. Between the staircase and the fridge stood a door, narrow, grey, no handle, just a door. Peppa froze. It had never been there before. She called for Mummy. Mummy, without turning away from the stove, calmly replied, That door has always been there." But her voice sounded just slightly wrong. Peppa came closer. There was no lock, but the door wouldn't open. The next day it was there again, and this time slightly open. Peppa slowly peeked inside. Darkness, emptiness, the smell of damp and old cloth. The walls, rough like concrete with long cracks. On the floor lay a toy, software, dirty, a copy of George's dinosaur, but not green, gray, and its eyes didn't match. One was glass, the other just a button. Peppa closed the door. Each day the room changed. A chair appeared, then a table, then footprints in the dust, small, hoof-shaped, leading in and out. Sometimes Peppa heard creaking, day or night, once laughter, thin, childlike. She thought it was George, but George was sitting by the window, drawing. He didn't even look at her. When she told her parents, Mummy said, "You're probably just tired." And Daddy quietly added, "There's nothing there." He no longer looked toward that side of the kitchen. On the fourth night, Peppa woke up. Her window was open even though she hadn't touched it. On the floor lay a piece of paper, a child's drawing. It showed her room and the new door. Beside it, a figure, small, dark, faceless, a single line written underneath, "I'm already here." In the morning, Daddy went to work and never came back. Mummy washed a cup and stared at the wall. Peppa asked where George was. Mummy smiled. "He's playing in his room." Her voice was flat, empty, but George wasn't in his room. His bed was neatly made, his toys were in place, silence, and the fifth room's door was wide open. Peppa stepped inside. Inside it was different. A hallway, too long, too narrow, gray walls covered with children's drawings, all the same, a house, a sun, and a black figure next to Peppa, always getting closer, with each drawing, closer. George's shoes lay on the floor, wet, not muddy, as if he'd been standing on the damp floor for a long time. The light bulb flickered. Behind her, a soft click. The door closed. The next day the house was calm. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a bathroom, a living room, 4 rooms, as always, no extra door. But if you stand by the wall between the stairs and the fridge, if you press your ear against it, you might hear soft footsteps, scratching, and a voice that sounds almost like Peppa's, calling your name, slowly, as if learning how to speak again. Peppa Pig, the Tooth Fairy. One morning, Peppa noticed one of her teeth was loose. She showed it to Mummy Pig, who nodded. Nothing unusual, just a baby tooth. It would fall out soon. Peppa was excited. When a tooth falls out, you can place it under your pillow, and in the night, the Tooth Fairy comes. All day, Peppa played with the tooth, wiggling it back and forth. By evening, it finally came out. She wrapped it gently in tissue, placed it under her pillow, and went to bed smiling. The night was quiet at first. In the middle of the night, Peppa woke up. Her room was dark, but not completely. In the corner, a strange glow shimmered, not yellow, not white, a greenish silver light. Something was standing by the door. A figure, tall, too tall, bent over, movements like sliding across the floor. As it came closer, Peppa shut her eyes tight, but even through her eyelids she felt it, something reaching under her pillow. It lasted just a moment, but it felt like she was lying there for hours. When she woke up in the morning, the tooth was gone. Under her pillow was a small, rusty key. The next day, another tooth began to loosen. It fell out without pain, by itself, then another and another. No one seemed to notice. Mummy Pig said it was normal, but other children only lost 1 tooth. Peppa had already lost 7 in 2 days. Each night under the pillow, a new item appeared, a key, a coin with unreadable numbers, a piece of bone, a shard of mirror scratched in the center. Peppa stopped speaking. She didn't smile anymore. She didn't want to eat. Each night she heard steps, floorboards creaked, cold wind came from the closet, though the window was shut. On the 6th night she woke up and couldn't close her mouth. All her teeth were gone, even the back ones. There was something sitting at the edge of the bed, closer than before. Peppa could see its face now, but it wasn't a face, just skin stretched over something. No eyes, no mouth. On its fingers, a string of teeth tied like beads. The thing leaned forward. Peppa felt the cold and the smell of metal. She tried to scream, but no sound came. In the morning, the bed was empty. Her parents thought Peppa had gone to the garden. but she wasn't there, and not anywhere in the house. On her pillow was a note, scratched into the fabric using enamel. "Thank you."